Hi, everybody. We're so glad you're here. My name is Judy. I am part of the Auggie community. So glad that you are joining us midday for this very important conversation. I know that I myself, with a 2.5-year-old, am needing to talk about the tantrums because they drive me up the wall. But if this is your first Auggie event, hello and welcome. Auggie is the #1 platform for parents to find community, share recommendations, learn from experts. This event is being recorded, so you will be able to access that later. Don't worry about taking notes. Join for the awesome conversation. Our speaker today is Jessica from Rooted in Routine. She will have some slides. And so, yeah, don't worry about taking notes. Focus on the content. We want to get your questions asked as well. And we have about 45 minutes together. So Jessica, before I turn it over to you, I just want to let you know we've got El Paso, 3.5, 2-year-old, expecting mom in San Diego, mom of 3 and 1, Northern VA, we've got 3-year, 2 month, Ontario, Canada, 13 months, 14 months. Okay, so a really great range. So
Mhm.
while those are still coming through in the chat, I want to pass it over to Jessica to briefly introduce herself, and then we will kick off the event. I will be keeping my eye on the chat. She will be focused on getting through the content, making sure we have, able to answer those questions. And we will probably hold questions until the end, but let them trickle through, and I'll kind of organize and figure out the order to ask those questions. So very last one, 12 months, 2.5, 3 months.
Cool.
So, all right, take it away, Jessica.
Cool. Well, thank you, Judy. Hi, everyone. I'm really excited to be here. This is my first time being inside the Auggie community, and I'm really excited to dive into this topic. We're going to be talking all about tantrums today in the toddler years. And it sounds like everybody who has, said where they're from and the age of their child or children so far, you're in the right place. This is really going to be focused on tantrums and that 1 to 4-ish-year-old age range. So let's just dive right in. And as Judy said, if you have questions as I'm talking, please use the chat and ask them, or even just comment if you're like, yes, I can relate to that, or anything like that. And we'll get to any like specific questions that I don't cover towards the end. All right. So let me, oops, there we go. Okay. Just a little intro slide if you're not familiar with me. My name is Jessica. A little background and why I'm here. My background is in pediatric occupational therapy. I have been practicing in pediatrics since about 2014, so over a decade now. And I've worked in lots of different settings with children. And then over the course of my career in various settings with children, all the way from babies all the way up to like preteens, I really kind of honed in on the toddler and preschooler years as being the age range that I love working with, and in particular how routines can support families and children. And so I founded a business called Rooted in Routine. I am very active on Instagram, so some of you may have found me on there. If not, after this, come say hello at Rooted in Routine. And there I just share how to incorporate routines into your parenting. I also personally have 2 kids of my own, a 2-year-old and a 5-year-old, and we live outside of Denver, Colorado. A little picture from last year's Christmas card. And yeah, I just want to help you feel more confident and more supported. So let's get into today's specific topic. We're talking about tantrums, and I'm going to dive into kind of some background details first because I think it's really important to understand what we're even talking about when we talk about tantrums. I'm sure you're experiencing them, but I want to dive into the details first and talk about kind of some information that can really help you understand what's going on. And then we're going to get into like specifics of, okay, well, what do I do about it? So first, I literally get tons of questions about tantrums, and I guess toddler behavior and what they're doing and what they're not doing every single day. These are literally just some of the most recent the recent DMs or comments that I've gotten. But I want you to know, first of all, that if you're here because this is an area that you're struggling with, or you're just overwhelmed with, or you're fed up with, or it's just you just want to learn more tools, you are definitely not alone. This is a very normal part of toddlerhood, but it's also very frustrating and can be so hard as a parent. Um, so that's why we're here. I did want to mention that there is a lot of evidence and kind of clear data, if you will, that how the adult does respond to a child in these moments of kind of emotional outbursts um, can make a difference. And in the short term, right, it can help you if you know how to respond to it. It just makes your life easier. But then in the long term, it really is all about how to build the foundation for emotional regulation and emotional resilience for your child, right? So it's like, okay, they're freaking out because you cut their banana in half the wrong way. What does that even, how are we going to get past that as they get older? And what are some tools that they can have eventually to be able to handle whatever they're feeling, which in that moment could be frustration or anger, right? About the banana. And over time they can build these skills. And I think we all want that. I think we all would love our child to build emotional resiliency, right? Be able to handle difficult emotions, and kind of have coping skills through that. So here's what we can expect today. As I said, we're going to kind of dive into, I first really want to define what a tantrum is. People kind of throw that word around, but we'll kind of define what it actually means and why it's happening. I'm a firm believer in parents understanding, broadly speaking, you don't have to be like a child psychologist or scientist to understand this, but really just generally broadly understanding like what's going on in your child's brain when this is happening and why this happens from a brain science perspective. I promise it won't be confusing, but understanding that will really help you understand why this is happening. And when we understand why something's happening, then we know we can figure out how to support it. So after that, we'll talk about how to respond in the moment, right? So let's use the banana freak out example. Like, what do you actually do? Okay. And then we're going to talk about how to respond after and potentially even prevent some of this stuff from happening. Although I will say it's not possible to prevent every single tantrum because they are a normal part of development. We'll talk a little bit about managing tantrums outside the house. And then also just towards the end of like, if you have a gut feeling in your head or in your heart after this of like, this doesn't seem normal, right? Like my child seems to be on the extreme end of this, or this is really impacting our family and our home and our routine. I'll kind of dive in a little bit about like how to know when to seek extra support if that's even warranted and if you're even interested in doing that. And then we'll get into some Q&A. So as I'm talking, if you have specific examples that come to mind, could be from this morning, share them in the chat so we can kind of cover that too. I think talking about real life examples is really important and helpful. All right. So let's dive into just the definition of this. So we use the word tantrum. I think that's kind of like common language, common term that's thrown around. Some people call it like a meltdown. If there's any other words you use, throw them in the chat. But essentially, a tantrum from the dictionary is defined as an uncontrolled outburst of anger and frustration. Okay, that's kind of broad. But I think what's really important to note is for a toddler, right? There is a cause of the tantrum, and then there is a result of what's going on. The cause is typically an emotion that your child is feeling. Usually it's some sort of like negative emotion, right? Like frustration, anger, they're mad because of something. And that something is often to us as adults seemingly insignificant. If we use the banana example, it's like, why are they freaking out? It's just a banana. Like it will taste the same, right? Because we understand that as an adult, but they don't. And that will trigger them to have an emotion about it. And then they will throw their tantrum. And we're going to get into what a tantrum actually looks like. I just want to mention this. This is not on here, but when we use the term meltdown from a clinical perspective, from my background in pediatric therapy, typically or oftentimes the difference is that a meltdown often will not have a trigger that you're aware of. Um, it so, it usually results from some sort of either like overwhelm or nervous system kind of like dysregulation or sensory trigger. It could be all of those things that I just said. You don't need to know what those really mean for the purposes of today. But oftentimes if we say like, oh, they're having a huge meltdown, in clinical terms, that would be for we're not sure of the reason, and it's different than what a tantrum is. A tantrum is we kind of know why. It's just even if in our brains we're like that is so ridiculous, we at least know why. So I hope that makes sense. So what you see, right, as the parent or the adult is typically some sort of physical behavior, which is just like what are they doing outwardly. And oftentimes it's some of these things listed. They're throwing their body on the floor, they're crying, they're screaming, they're hitting, they're kicking, flailing their body around, throwing things, banging into things, all of those. I'm sure there's more that I missed. And it can be on the mild end, right? It could just be like a little bit of crying and maybe like flailing their body. Or it could be on the more kind of severe end of really throwing their body on the floor, flailing themselves around, yelling at the top of their lungs. Okay. So all of that is just kind of considered like the spectrum of severity when it comes to the what we outwardly see. But all of that is what it looks like when your child is having a tantrum. And I think the most important thing to remember is this pink box here. Um, Even though it's crazy to you, because a lot of times the trigger is something really silly in our adult rational brain. They are using this behavior to communicate with you. And there's a saying in the child development world, the saying is all behavior is communication. Now, there's a little bit of pushback against that kind of broad statement for certain reasons in terms of like the nervous system in the body. But for the purposes of today, I think that's really true that they're trying to tell you something and they just don't have the words to do it. Now, it's important to know that if your child does talk well, maybe they're on the older side, or maybe they just have really advanced language for their age. Even when your child has pretty good language and verbal skills, when their brain is heightened in an emotional state, they will not be able to access it. So essentially, they're not able to tell you what's wrong, right? They're not able to say, Mommy, can you please get me a new banana? I didn't like that you cut it that way, right? Even though that still is ridiculous in our brain, we're like, you don't need a new banana, but they're not able to say it like that. They're showing you with their body how upset they are. And so that's essentially what the tantrum is. It's showing you how they're feeling or something they want to communicate with you that they're not able to verbally tell you. So why does this happen? And why do I keep mentioning, you know, the banana and kind of like seemingly ridiculous triggers? Well, this is essentially why tantrums happen in the toddler and young child ages. And long story short, all you really need to know is that there is an area of the brain, every single person has this area that is directly behind your forehead. It's called the prefrontal cortex. And essentially, this is a really important area for being able to do things like be logical, rationalize, control your emotions, control your impulses. And that area of the brain does not fully develop until mid your mid 20s, which is really wild if you think about it. I think we all kind of hear that stat being thrown around, right? Like your brain's not fully developed by till you're 25. Well, when they say that, they're saying this part of the brain specifically, because a lot of areas of the brain are developed at birth or soon after. Some of the more kind of like primitive areas that you need to just kind of like survive. But this area is not. And so essentially, your child is like walking around, seems like a pretty, developed human. Like they can walk, maybe they can talk, they can do a lot of things. But this part of their brain is so underdeveloped. And so these skills are really hard, if not impossible for them. So if you look here at this list, they essentially are not going to be able to do these things. And I think it's really tricky as a parent because our job, right, is to kind of find that balance between meeting them where they are, validating what we know to be true about all of this, but then figuring out, okay, but we still have to like get through our day and get through life, right? Get through our routines. So we're going to talk about like how to find that middle ground and what that looks like. But I think this is, if you leave with like one more like informational tip that you learned today, I think this one is the one to leave with, because essentially all of these things they can't do. So they really can't respond to things logically. They're not going to be able to be like, oh, mom cut the banana in half, but that's okay. It still tastes the same. Like they're just not. They're not going to be able to rationalize. And that's a big one that I see parents trying to do. They're trying to rationalize with their child in these moments, just like you would rationalize with maybe your partner or your mom, or like your friend, right? Other adults. It's impossible to rationalize with a young child. They're just not going to be able to understand that. So the more you try, the more you'll probably fail, and it will usually perpetuate the tantrum. Um, and then we talked about this before, like they really can't say their feelings, their emotions verbally, um, especially when their emotions are heightened. So all of these things, eventually they can practice and they will get over time, but it to be honest, will take years. And so that's really just the name of the game, right? It's like we're fighting against their vastly underdeveloped brain. Um, and I do think that just reminding of yourself of this can kind of take the pressure off, because you're like, okay, my child, nothing's wrong with them. Like they're responding in a way that actually makes sense given what we know about what their brain is like, you know? So I hope that is clear and helpful. Let's get into, let me make sure this is going. Oh, here we go. Yeah. Okay. So let's get into like, now that we know all that, what do we actually do about it? So we're first going to talk about what does this is kind of overall best practice. Okay. I want to be clear that when we talk about how to respond to tantrums in the moment, I'm going to give you kind of like step by step, because I do think that's helpful to like know, okay, this is what I do first, this is what I do next, etc. You do not have to be perfect about doing this 100% of the time. If you try to do that, you're probably going to fail and you will feel like a failure as a parent. It's not going to be possible to go through all of these steps every single time, for a variety of reasons. You could just be so overwhelmed, so stressed out, so overstimulated that you're just like, you can't, right? But I think what's important to remember is if you try to do this when you can, and a majority of the time, you're still going to get somewhere and it's still going to help a lot. So give yourself grace, okay? I like to start off with that, because I think we can think like, well, I'm not gonna be able to do that, or I can't do that, or if you don't do it right, then I'm a total failure and I messed my kid up. That's not true. Just aim for, majority if possible. So the first thing to remember is that when we think about a tantrum, I like to have a mindset shift, and I like to teach this, okay? I like to use the analogy of a wave, like in the ocean. It's going to start, it's going to crest, and it's going to come down. And how long that lasts or how quickly that goes on is kind of dependent on your child and what happened in the specific scenario. But it is like a wave and it will end. And so I think remembering that is really helpful. And what's really important is that usually, okay, the majority of the time, I'm not going to recommend you try super hard and actually like do things to try to get it to stop. It's like if you think about a wave in the ocean, you can't really like stop the wave like once it's going. Like it kind of just has to go and it has to pass. And sometimes the more we fight against it, the worse it's going to get, the longer it might last, the harder it's going to be to stop. And so oftentimes doing and saying, and you'll see me get to this, less is more. But I hope that that wave analogy is helpful. Another little like mantra I like to teach is this one here in the middle, that all emotions are okay, but all behaviors are not. So an emotion, right, is how they're feeling. And this one's hard because sometimes I'm like, I don't think you should be so upset about the banana. Like that's why are you so freaking out and angry? But you have to stop and remember that's their emotion. Okay, that's how they're feeling. you're really not going to be able to control how they feel about something. They're a totally separate human being from you. And I think what's really helpful to keep in mind is that in the toddler years, the triggers that trigger these emotions are typically in our minds, in our adult rational minds, really silly. But as your child gets older, they'll probably have, triggers or situations where they are more reasonable to you, and they're going to be feeling these same emotions. They're going to feel frustrated, mad, angry, and we want to teach them that it's okay to feel those things, right? And I think at least I could speak for myself. I'm in my like mid to late 30s, and I think our generation, at least for me, we weren't really taught that, or we weren't really taught that, like, or talk. It wasn't really talked about a lot. And now there's a lot more kind of research and data coming out on emotional regulation, and even just being able to identify your own emotions as an adult, and like whether and then judgment of your own emotions and all of that stuff. And it really does start when we're young. And so all of this to say, your child's emotion is not the problem. Okay. It's what they're doing with that emotion that could potentially be the problem, or unsafe, or really triggering for you, or really loud, right? Or inappropriate behavior. And so just remembering that is a really helpful kind of like mantra to remember. So we also have to remember kind of what we talked about in terms of the brain, but age appropriate skills and child development, and how that comes into play is a lot of times our expectations of what our child's able to do independently, or not, but often independently, is simply just too high for their kind of typical development trajectory. And so when that happens, oftentimes things can come up like this, right? And so if we remember and we kind of keep in mind, like, it is normal for them to need a lot of help in this. It is normal for them to not be able to do this by themselves all of the time. It kind of just gets our expectations in check. And then we're not expecting too much of our child as well. Okay, so let's get into the step by step after all that kind of background. So we're going to go through the steps. And as I said, I think what's important here is it's nice to kind of go through them step by step, and it's going to seem kind of like a lot, but once you just, practice a couple times, it does become more routine for you. And it's really not that difficult to kind of like remember what to do and what not to do when you're able to, and when you're regulated. Again, you don't have to do these every single time, but this is how I would recommend what we do in the moment. So let's say your child, you cut the banana wrong, your child's freaking out, they're throwing themselves on the floor, they're trying to hit you, and they're crying. Okay, the first thing really quickly is to stop and think, what is their emotion right now, and what was the trigger? Right? So in this example, it's pretty easy, I would assume, right? And you're going to have to make some assumptions here, because again, they're not going to be telling you. They're not going to be saying like, "Mommy, I'm so frustrated. I really didn't want the banana cut like that." But you're going to have to guess. So your best guess could be they're feeling frustrated, or they're mad at you, and the trigger was the banana. The next thing, and I'm going to mention like how to do this, is to label their feeling out loud to them. Now, you might hear this be talked about as like validate them, right? This is something that I think is really important to do, but only like once. I think a lot of parents get stuck on this step. And I will say that this step for some kids will escalate or exacerbate the tantrum in like immediately in the moment. And that's okay. But it is really important for them to feel essentially heard, like you understand them, and for them to know, okay, like mommy does get it, even if it's going to trigger them more. And I've worked with lots of different types of kids, different temperaments, diagnoses, no diagnoses, and all of that. And I do think that this is really important for all kids. But again, for some, it could potentially like escalate the situation. And I still think it's important. So you would say something like, "I know, I hear you. You're really frustrated." If you're not sure what they're feeling like, just make your best guess. It's usually going to be, frustration, mad. You could say you're really mad. Um, as they get a little older, you can kind of choose. Do you want to use like simple words like sad or mad, or do you want to use a little bit more like higher level emotional words like overwhelmed, frustrated. Trying to think if you guys have others that you're guessing that your child feels, you could put them in the chat. But you just make your best guess and you say it in a very kind of calm, neutral, but like warm and empathetic way. And again, you only have to say this once. If you feel like your child responds well to this, like if you feel like your child actually calms down when you say something like this, then you could repeat yourself a couple times, but you don't have to. And I think sometimes the mistake that I see as parents are like, I know you're so frustrated. I know you're frustrated. Being frustrated is hard, like blah, 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 blah. That's a lot of repetition and it's a lot of words. And you'll see in the moment that sometimes even just talking too much will make it worse. Um, and then the other thing I want to mention is kind of like the same way I said before of how children, when your emotional state is heightened, you're not able to speak or as clearly, right? Or you access your verbal skills. Your child is not able to access their verbal skills. They're also not able to like fully hear you. Okay. And that's why a lot of times like the talking too much, it gets you nowhere. So say it once, validate them, tell them you hear them, and just make your best guess on how they're feeling. So it's like freezing. Get the next. Oh, here we go. Okay. Step 3 is kind of optional. So this really depends on your child. But if it's desired and if you feel like your child responds well to this, offer them some sort of physical comfort. This might look like just kind of going over to them, maybe squatting down on their level, maybe rubbing their back, offering a hug. I think there's a misconception here that like if you don't do this when your child upset, then that's going to cause some like damage to them, or you're not going to be promoting secure attachment. I want to be clear that this is really individualized from child to child, and some children really don't want to be touched, or they just don't want you to be close to them in the moment. And so you do not have to do this if it doesn't seem right. And I will also say that sometimes it depends on the situation, right? So there may be a child you sometimes they do want their hug, or they do like when you kind of just like get close to them, and other times they don't. So just in the moment you offer it, you can kind of walk over to them, gently squat down, rub their back. If they seem to like that, meaning like maybe they calm a little bit, or maybe they at least don't escalate, then you can keep doing it. If you feel like it escalates them, triggers them, just doesn't seem to be what they want, then you just stop and kind of like just back off a little bit. Now, all of that can be done in like, I don't know, 5 seconds. So I made it sound like a lot, but basically you can stop and think about their emotion. You can tell them one time how they're feeling, that you hear them, and then you can offer their comfort pretty quickly. Okay. So we haven't done anything like we haven't said too much yet, right? And we haven't really like done anything grand yet. We're just kind of getting that first few seconds. Now, this one's really important. So the next thing you want to do, and I think you kind of do this naturally a lot of times, right, is figure out what's actually wrong with the behavior. And if there's anything unsafe, we have to address that, of course. So a lot of times it's like, as the parent, you're like, but I don't want them to be yelling. I don't want them to be flailing their body on the floor. But stop and ask yourself, like, is that actually unsafe? Is it harmful? And that's kind of not a black and white question, because sometimes as the parent, you're like, well, it's not unsafe, but like it's harmful to the sibling, or because it's so loud and it's disruptive, right? But there's kind of like a hierarchy here, right? So if it's truly something unsafe, like if they're starting to throw things at you, or if they're starting to like bang their head against the wall, then you need to calmly but quickly stop whatever the unsafe behavior is. Take things away from them, move them away from whatever it is that they're using, like as objects to throw. And it's okay to do that, right? You need to keep them safe. You need to keep yourself safe. You need to keep anyone else around them safe. So that's a very important boundary to hold. And then I think overall, just saying what the boundary is about the behavior is important to say again, just like one time or two times. This is also one of the things that sometimes can escalate some kids. It really depends on their temperament, it depends on their personality, but it is really important for them to understand like mommy's not saying that I'm not allowed to be mad, but mommy's saying I'm not allowed to throw these trucks at her. Now you can see here, I say crying or throwing their body on the floor is not inherently unsafe. I mean, throwing their body on the floor could get a little bit unsafe if they're like really going at it, but for example, like I have a 2-year-old, I said, and he's very much in a phase where he will kind of like throw his body once on the floor and then kind of like gently kick his arms and legs around when he's having his tantrums. And it's not unsafe. Like he's not hurting himself. He's not hurting anyone else. And so that's the type of thing that we're going to let them do. Okay. That is the wave and it's going to come down. And I'm not going to try to stop it. Okay. Now, here's honestly, like the most important step. Stay close and wait it out. Now, when I say stay close, I don't mean you need to be like touching them, trying to hug them the whole time or patting their back the whole time, but close enough that you're like keeping an eye, right? And you're not like you're able to monitor for safety essentially. But honestly, waiting it out is really, really, really important. And again, there's going to be some times where like, I just need this to stop. And so I'm going to give in. I'm going to give them what they want, or I'm going to stop doing what they ask me, or I'm going to go get them another banana. Okay. But do know that what you do in those moments, let's say you do go get them on the other banana, you are essentially teaching them that next time they do it again, they're going to get the other banana again. And that's okay. Okay. It's okay to do it once or twice here and there. Totally normal. Like we're all humans. But I think it's important to remember that oftentimes doing nothing to try to get it to stop is going to be the best way to handle it in terms of letting it pass, letting it peak and then come down, and teaching them that their emotions are okay to be felt. And essentially their emotions will pass, okay? Like without having to do anything drastic. And again, that's like a really good lesson for adults too, right? So I mean, here I say saying more will often make it worse. That is very, very true. Okay. So if you are kind of digging your heels in, trying to get them to stop crying, trying to get them to pick their body up off the floor, talking to them a lot, repeating yourself over and over, you're really not going to get anywhere. And oftentimes it will make them tantrum harder. Now, let me see. So I think something to mention too, in terms of timing, like there are going to be, sorry, let me back up. Anytime your child is having a tantrum, it is going to feel like eternity. Okay. Like even if it's like 30 seconds, it's going to feel like eternity. So just know that that's normal. And I think it's also important to, like, if you feel like you're actually concerned about like how long this is happening, time it and just see. Okay. And just like keep a little bit of data for yourself, because there is definitely something to be said for when this is happening for a really long time, like longer than what we would say is typical. That could be a sign that maybe your child does need some extra support, or you need some extra support, or there's just something else going on kind of like underneath all of it that we might need to investigate or address. But I do think first it's important to like get some data for yourself. So just like put your phone on a timer and just be like, I wonder how long he's going to kick and tantrum is like on the floor for. Like, is it 2 minutes or is it 30 minutes? Right? Like those are really different. And 2 minutes will feel like 30 minutes, but it's not. All right.
Jessica, I'm sorry to interrupt. I do want to interject. We have about 9 minutes left. If you do want to go over, I just want folks to make sure drop your questions in the chat. We'll probably handle them as they come through. But on that note that you just mentioned, somebody asked, is, over an hour too long? And then
Uh-huh.
if the child is like running away to another area and tells you to go away, how do you
Uh-huh.
stay close? I don't know if you want to answer that now, if you want to answer later.
Yeah, yeah, I can answer those now. Those are really good questions. So the first thing for 1 hour, that is definitely a long time. But if it's only happened like once or kind of like a one-off type of scenarios, I wouldn't worry too much about it. Oftentimes, if in those moments, we want to make sure like, was there something else going on, right? Like were they maybe like so overtired, like they skipped their nap that day or something like that, and they're just like not in their normal self, or are they really hungry or something like that? Um, if 1 hour tantrums are happening like regularly, then I definitely would reach out. You maybe start by reaching out to your pediatrician and asking, or just saying like, listen, this is something that seems excessive, because that is definitely excessive. It's if it's happening regularly, without any reason, right? And then the question about going away, or your child asking you to go away. Yeah, no, so this is exactly what I mean. It is, if they're asking you to go away in the moment, you can definitely leave them and let them be. Just make sure they're in a place that is safe, right? Like they're not going to like hurt themselves or get into certain things that are not safe for a toddler. Um, and by staying close, I just say like keep an eye, like maybe like go back and check every minute or so and see what's going on. Depending on what your home layout is, you could like leave a door open or just like be yourself in a room where you're closer to them so you can kind of hear what's going on. But it is a true thing that some kids, just like adults, honestly prefer to be alone when they're having heightened emotions. And I think it's important to respect that. I think a lot of times we hear like, you have to stay close and give them a hug, right? But that's not true. Like some people just don't want that. So I hope that answered that. Um, okay, we're almost done here. So just a couple things about what not to do. Um, First things, if we tell them to stop doing whatever they're doing, or basically try to invalidate the emotion behind it, like stop crying, that's so silly, that's so ridiculous, they're probably going to tantrum harder. um, the other thing I say here, and this is what I kind of mentioned about the banana, is just give in or give them whatever they want so they'll just stop crying. If you feel like you just need them to stop crying because you yourself are so overstimulated by like the sound or the noise or the chaos, I think it's better for you to figure out, how can I regulate myself? Like maybe I need to just like step into the other room for a second. Maybe I need to like put headphones in or put earplugs in so it's not quite so loud for me. But if we give them what they want so that they stop crying, if we do that regularly, it's going to make your problem worse. Um, Lastly, the other one is, trying to reason logically is not going to work. Like I said before. So if we're saying like this example, the blue cup's the same, like it doesn't matter what cup you're using, or the banana will taste the same. It doesn't matter that it was cut. That they truly, their brain cannot understand that. I know it sounds crazy. You're like, that seems simple, but their brain really is not going to be able to understand that. And then bribes. Okay, bribes. Whenever you say something like, okay, I'll give you this, or you can have this if you stop. I am not a perfectionist. Okay. There's going to be times in parenting where it's probably important to use bribes, but save them for those times. Okay. Like save them for when you really need them. And maybe that's like if you're out in public or you're on an airplane, or you're, like usually moments like that are like more high stakes places, not in your home. Okay. All right. Just briefly talking about what to do after is really important. Now, again, oftentimes I think parents are confused and they think that this is what we're supposed to do during. But it's best to wait until they're calm. Wait until they're calm. Okay. This could be directly after the tantrum passed, or it could even be like later in the day, or, later that evening. Just like talk back to them about what you noticed. Just say something like, yeah, I remember earlier you felt really frustrated because I cut your banana wrong, and just see what they say. Um, you know, this is really helping them learn to just process the experience and understand, like tie the emotion to what happened. You can start super simple, like when they're around 2, you can start doing this. As your child gets older, when they're 3, 4, 5 years old, you can have like more in-depth conversations about what happened. But it's a good habit to get into. You don't have to do it every single time. Okay. You're going to drive yourself crazy. But in the moments where you're like, that was actually, that was a particularly hard one, or that's one that I do want to talk about, do it when you can. And most importantly, just talk about what you can do next time, what they can do next time. And you can say, it could be something like, instead, you can say XYZ. You can say, Mommy, I didn't want you to cut my banana. Now, you telling them that is not going to work right away. They're not going to be able to tell you about the banana the next time it happens. But if you do it, you know, you're repeating yourself, you're talking about it a lot of times, over time, they will be able to get there. All right. Prevention. I mentioned this at the beginning. It's not possible to prevent tantrums. They are a normal part of toddlerhood, but there are some things that can help. I mentioned this in that answer to that person who was asking about like the 1 hour tantrum. There's definitely something to be said for tantrums being more heightened when your child is really tired, hungry, thirsty, thrown off their routine, in a new situation. So just knowing that is really helpful, right? And so the more you can just try to keep things consistent when it comes to those basics, the better you're going to be. Um, and then a lot of times, a lot of children do have what triggers them is kind of sudden changes or things that they didn't expect to be happening. So when and if and when you know something's going to be different, look different, tell them in advance if possible. You don't have to do this every single time, it's impossible, but when it is, try to, and that can help. And then the last one we've talked about a little bit, but basically trying to hold your boundaries about like what is actually allowed and what's not allowed, and you giving into their requests. So if their tantrum is about something that you're not giving them, like for example, they wanted to eat a cookie and you said no, and then they threw a tantrum. Obviously, if you then end up giving them the cookie, they're going to learn, oh, if I just scream hard enough, my mom gives me the cookie. They don't actually say that, like they're not, but it's like a subconscious thing. All right, we talked about this a little bit with the 1 hour plus thing. But essentially, here's a couple lists of like, if you feel like any of these are happening kind of on a regular basis, this is definitely something that you can explore more if you are interested. And essentially, you know, always chatting with your pediatrician is a good first step. Um, what the support might look like, it kind of depends on what's going on. But typically in the toddler preschooler age range, occupational therapy or speech therapy, if it's coming from a place of like lack of language, are usually kind of like first steps. And so that could be something that might be really helpful. Okay, this is my last little tip. I think this one is so important to, again, just like help build to that emotional regulation. Like, what do we want our child to do when they're feeling certain feelings? And again, this is helpful for adults. But if you kind of narrate out loud and talk about your own emotions, either in the moment that they're happening or right after, it's helping to teach your child how to do the same. So, for example, just talk about like how you're feeling. Like, I felt so mad earlier. I felt so overwhelmed earlier when you and your brother were both screaming. It was really loud for me, right? And then say like what you're going to do about it. I needed to take a break in the other room. Even just talking through that and kind of making that a part of your day in the moment or after can be really helpful. Okay. I think I got through it. Let me. Here's
I
where to find
dropped your
me.
handle in the chat.
Okay, cool.
Thank you so much for just the structure that you provided to this. As somebody with a 2.5-year-old and now a newborn, I'm not in the moment able to think like how much to talk, how little to talk, how much space to give, but my toddler does if she has a tantrum, she says, give me space. So I'm glad that she has
Mhm.
the language to communicate that now. Um, yeah, I really appreciate all the tips that you provided. I just want everybody to know that, again, if you didn't take notes, that's fine. In the Auggie app, you can not only see events that are coming up, but you can see past events. And when you look at the past events, you can find the recordings there. There will also be a post in the Auggie app that will say kind of, a summary of some of the tips of today, the recording, share it with your friends because we all know somebody who could use a lot of this information. Jessica, like so many gems were dropped. Um, I know that there was a specific question about potty training, and I'm going to direct them to the potty training event because it's not exactly a tantrum per se. We are just a
Yeah.
couple minutes over, but please, please, please give Jessica a follow. There's also a part of the Auggie app, the toddler community. So whatever you're going through, there's other people who have a banana situation. For me, it's the pasta was touching the sauce. You liked it
Mhm.
yesterday, you don't like it today, and I don't know what's going on. Um, and so yeah, I'm realizing I need to just be a bit more aware and just ride the waves like a contraction is what I heard from you. Like
Yeah.
it's necessary. You can't do anything about it. You actually need it. That's what I kind of heard today. So we got some thank yous in the chat. People found it really helpful. Thank you everybody so much for tuning in. We hope to see Jessica for more future events. And I look forward to seeing you at the next one, connecting with you and the app. Thank you so much for being part of the Auggie community, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.